Alright, so good day and welcome to this card overview rather than a review, I guess. So I'm going to look at the cards, the Universal cards and the Grand Alliance cards from the latest expansions. So that's the Nethermaze core set as well as the Exiled Dead. Yeah, so let's just start with end phases. And then I'll move over to searches, third end phase, Ploys, Gambit spells, and upgrades, and then I'll do the Grand Alliance cards in the same order. So let's just start with the Universal cards. So if you're here for the Grand Alliance cards, just skip ahead to that entry. I'll make chapters here in the video to help you guys out. Let's get things cracking. Universal cards. First up is Cryptic Clues. Duel scores in an end phase if there are two or more surviving friendly fighters, and each of those fighters is on a feature token in a cover hex or in a lethal hex. So I think that's quite doable for smaller warbands. Especially if you have like a 3-man warband with some range and you don't really nerf yourself by not being adjacent to an enemy. Something like Vermspat with pretty durable fighters, and this should be fairly doable. Next up is Secrets Uncovered. Hybrid scores in an end phase if there are no cover hexes in enemy territory, or there is a friendly fighter in each cover hex in enemy territory. Yeah, that's gonna be a bit hard to dictate. You don't really know how your opponent will set up, so I don't think it's worth it for one glory. So, next up, Brave Advance scores in an end phase if your leader is in enemy territory. Easy enough. And one or more friendly fighters are in no one's or your territory. So that's just super easy for something like Mollog. Charge ahead with Mollog. You don't need to be in a specific place, just in enemy territory. And keep the Stalag Squig like in the furthest corner in your... I mean, you will nerf yourself a bit because he's great for giving support. But yeah, you just pick the mushroom or whatever. Yeah, that's very easy for him. Shum the Waters scores in an end phase if one or more enemy fights are each on a feature token. And one or more of those fighters have one or more wound counters. That's a little bit harder. But having one enemy on a feature token with wounds should not be unthinkable during the course of a game, and too glory for something that will just probably happen. It's quite good. Claim it all. Score this in an end phase if your leader is the only fighter holding an objective in enemy territory. I mean, if it were the only friendly fighter, that would be pretty easy, but this is kind of hard to dictate. Playing against a defensive warband, this can be harder, at least. Not impossible, but I think generally speaking it's not worth it. Extraordinary Revelation scores an end phase if two or more friendly fights are each holding an objective in enemy territory. So that's basically treasure hunters or whatever it's called. Same objective, and that's a solid one, so I guess this is pretty good if you want to go for aggro with a bit of hold. Super good for something like Squitch's White Claw, holding to an enemy territory when you can respawn on any starting hex. Also very strong. Alright. Ferret them out scores an end phase if one or more enemy assassins were taken out of action this round. That's gonna be very hard to dictate as well. Or one or more enemy fighters were taken out of action in your territory in this round. I also think this is generally not worth it, but if you're playing defensive with something like Grimwatch, because they also have a search for the same thing, so I mean, it's decent synergy there I guess. Yeah, any defensive team really should be able to score it, but I'm not sure if it will make the cut. Living on the Edge scores in an end phase if a friendly leader is vulnerable and that leader is in enemy territory. The vulnerable is kind of hard to to pinpoint. I mean, staying alive with 1 wound to score an objective. I'm not sure that's something you want to do. Lost leader scores in an end phase if your leader is out of action and you have more glory points than each opponent. It's a pretty weird card. But if you're playing Kamikaze with Godsworn Hunt, I guess it's scoreable. With a 3 wound lead with 1 dodge. Just place Fedra in the front and go guns blazing. I mean, if she doesn't die, you probably kill stuff, so you win either way. I mean, if it's a good card, I'm not sure. Lucky Find scores in an phase if 1 or more friendly fights each have 1 or more map upgrades. Depending on how many map upgrades there are, it's probably pretty easy. Master the Abyss scores in an phase if 3 or more friendly fighters are each in a cover hex. After you score this card, pick 1 opponent. That opponent warbands deal 1 damage to 1 fighter from your warband that's in a cover hex. I mean, putting 3 in a cover hex shouldn't be hard for something like Sarbek's Kits with Scoury and Scatter and all those stuff. And the move with Sarbag, Griskit and his 2 squeaks as well. So, but it kind of depends when you draw it. But putting 3 in cover hex, it shouldn't be impossible. And getting 1 damage on one of them is probably not that decisive. So yeah, might be worth it for them. Shifting Walls scores an end phase if no edge hexes are occupied. And each surviving fighter is adjacent to no blocked hexes. The first part will be pretty hard to have dominion over. The second part should be doable, I guess. Blocked is not the same as occupied, so blocked hexes you can just take a board with no blocked hexes and it should probably be doable. It will probably happen during the course of the game. If it makes a cut, I am dubious. Let's move over to search objectives. First up is change of priorities. Search scores immediately after your Gambit, which shows 1 or more friendly fighters who each had 2 or more illusion upgrades. I mean, if you're playing with like 7 or 8 illusions, it's really easy to set up, but I mean, at the same time choosing them will kill the illusions, so I mean, it seems counterproductive. I don't think it's really worth it. We'll have to playtest it, I guess. Ever Downwards scores immediately after your power step, in which you dealt 3 or more times. Or you dealt 1 or more times and one of the feature tokens you dealt was a hex in enemy territory and occupied by your leader. That seems really easy for Mollog or some big brute. Rothgorn, Kanan, whatever really. Even Morgok. Potentially broken card. Inevitable End. Search Duel scores immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action that takes the target out of action. If the attack roll contained only successes, including critical successes, and the damage characteristic was equal to or greater than the target's wound characteristic. I mean, as soon as you are meeting a band of elites, it will be pretty hard to set up. So I think the situationable character of the card makes it most of the time not worth it. I mean, if you're gonna take it, you're gonna take it with some really hard hitting dude with 2 hammers. Potentially with a reroll like Kanan. Courageous Conjurer. Search Hybrid scores immediately after resolving a friendly fighter spell if that fighter was vulnerable when you made that casting roll. I really don't like this card's banking on vulnerable fighters. I don't really know why they do that. Or that fighter was adjacent to 2 or more enemy fighters when you made the casting roll. I mean, both these conditions will be really hard to dictate. So I'm not a fan of this. Down with the ship. Search. Score this immediately after friendly fighter's attack action that takes an enemy leader in enemy territory or out of action. So it's basically like And yeah, that's gonna be, if you meet some aggressive leader, you're not gonna score it. So, 2 situational, sure it's 2 glory, but yeah. Feeding Fear. Search scores immediately after an enemy fighter is taken out of action during a round in which 1 or more domain gambits were played, or after an activation step in round 3 if 1 or more vulnerable enemy fighters are in enemy territory. So you have to wait for round 3 to be able to score it the second way. I mean, the first part is probably doable. I think taking a search objective that's 3rd round is kind of brain dead, but I'm not sure how many domain gambits. We'll have to get back to that one. Lured in. Scores immediately after an enemy fighter on an objective token in your territory is taken out of action. So it's even harder than the kill someone in your territory. And the same amount of glory. So sure it's a search, but you have to kill them on an objective, so not on a feature token. It's too hard. Shadow Elimination. Scores after a power step if you warband flip the feature token in enemy territory in that power step, and that token is an objective token held by a friendly leader. So it goes very well together with Ever Downwards. So basically you go onto a gloom, flip it onto the objective side and score both at the same time. So that's pretty strong. Sudden Revelation. Scores immediately after power step if you warband flip 2 or more features tokens in that power step. So that's pretty easy to do. I mean, flipping is delving, but delving... I mean, delving is flipping, but flipping isn't delving. So you can flip by a card, so you can flip by a delving. So this seems potentially broken and very good. Okay, let's move over to 3rd end phase, if there are any. We have a Fate Averted. Scores in 3rd end phase if 1 or more friendly fights are vulnerable, and 1 or more of those fights are in enemy territory. So if you're playing a team with a lot of tiny fighters just running through Elite Legs, basically into no enemy territory, should be really easy. But at the same time, 2 glory for 3rd end phase, I don't think 2 glory for 3rd end phase cards are really ever worth it. So it's a no take from me. Okay, let's move over to the Ploys. First up we have Dark Epiphany. Draw 1 power card for each friendly fighter in a cover hex, then discard that banning the power cards. So you draw 1, discard 1. I'm not sure. I'm not really a fan of discarding cards. But if you score via getting through your deck, I guess it's good. I'm not sure how viable that kind of play is right now. Leeched Strength. Choose 1 friendly fighter and 1 enemy fighter adjacent to that fighter. In the next activation, the chosen fighter's range 1 attack action have the damage characteristic equal to the highest damage characteristic of the chosen enemy fighter's attack action. I mean, in the right circumstance, that can certainly be very strong. Push onto an enemy leader with some... I mean, there are several fighters with like 3 or 4 swords dealing 1 damage. If you can push up to Kanan or Mollog or Black Powder, you can deal 3 or 4 damage with 4 swords. Maybe setting up assist. Yeah, that can be strong, but I'm not sure it'll make the cut. Might be too hard to set up. Phantom Theft. Reaction. Players after an enemy fighter is given an illusion upgrade. I don't like those cards because you can't really know if your opponent even will play an illusion. And if so, the player must pick 1, discard 1 glory point or break that card. I mean, the cards break anyway sooner or later, so it's not really that strong of an effect. Pierce the Darkness in the next activation. Attack actions that hurt a fighter in a cover hex as cleave or edge hex as cleave. I think just take +1 dice instead. It's just better. Vault's Mysterium is a waypoint card, +1 wizard level to each wizard. A wizard suffers backlash in the casting roll contains 1 or more crits, and when a wizard is dealt damage by actual backlash, deal 1 additional damage. So correct backlash is 2 damage, and just rolling a crit is regular backlash damage. So, for storm size curse breakers, you get 1 3-level wizard and 2 2-level wizards. That's pretty neat, but getting damage on fighters, just rolling a crit when you only have 3 fighters, I'm not sure. I mean, probably will playtest it. It seems like an interesting design. So it might be a good payoff, but yeah, let's see. Barging forward, choose 1 friendly fighter, scatter 5 from the chosen fighter's hex and push the chosen fighter along the chain to the end hex. If the chain is interrupted, or if that fighter would be pushed into a hex that is blocked or occupied, do not push them any further. After the push, if the chosen fighter is a brawler, deal 1 damage to 1 enemy fighter adjacent to the chosen fighter. So I think the second part is just some like icing on the cake, but scatter 5 and actually pushing all 5 is a crazy good push. It will probably see inclusion in a lot of decks. Now we have a domain card, which one of the objectives mentioned before. Each time a fighter is driven back into an edge hex or a hex adjacent to a blocked hex, deal 1 damage to that fighter. So it doesn't work with pushes, just drive backs. I'm not sure. And it's for every fighter, so even your fighters, I'm not sure. I mean, unless you're scoring off domain cards, I don't think it's worth it. Dark inversion, pick 2 feature tokens in empty hexes. Place each feature token in the hex the other feature token was in when you picked them. Yeah, I mean, if you're banking on like holding objectives in enemy territory, and possibly there's just 1 in reach of you, just swap places with one of the glooms you placed near the no man's land, and you are good to go. Might be strong in the right circumstance, but I probably wouldn't include it. In too deep, enemy fighters cannot be on guard in your territory. This effect persists until the end of the phase. A guard isn't that strong of an effect anyway, so I'm not sure about this. King of the Deeps. +1 dice to the first attack action made by a friendly fighter in the next activation step. That's always good because it's any range. It's a very good inclusion for any like ranged warband. +2 dice instead if 1 or more of the fighter's attack actions damage characteristics are greater than the target's wound characteristics. Right. So very strong for something like Molloy. And I mean, if it doesn't really have the second effect, is still just +1 dice, which is always solid. Okay, next up is Purified Waters reaction. Play this card after 1 or more domain cards, or discarded. Choose 1 friendly fighter, heal to the chosen fighter. I think it's too slow of an effect, and heal cards, I'm not really a fan of those anyway. Just kill stuff instead. Choose 1 friendly minion or choose 1 enemy minion. Push the chosen minion 1 hex. So it's strong in the sense that you can push a friendly fighter or an enemy fighter. So that's basically like a much worse version of the Earth Shakes for the chosen axis. But you're not sure the opponent will even have a minion, so I probably wouldn't include it. Reckless Rush. Double the move characteristic of the first friendly fighter to make a move action in the next activation step until that action has been resolved. Deal 1 damage to and then stagger that fighter. Yeah, if you really need to get to objectives or whatever, feature tokens, and you have an expendable fighter, that might be useful. You probably wouldn't do it early on in a round, because the stagger can kind of hurt, but Yeah, for old warbands like Grimwatch or Gits, can be quite good actually. Step between shadows. Choose one friendly fighter in a cover hex that has no move or charge tokens. Place a chosen fighter in a different cover hex and give them one move token. Okay. I mean, you can really bamf to the other side of the board with this one. And then you can just attack from there in the next activation. So that can potentially be a really strong card. That's Suffocating Mists. Choose one enemy fighter that's in a cover hex. Deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter. I think that's a great ping card for, I mean, for anyone who wants ping, obviously, but this is very welcome for a band like Wormspat. They have not had very many good ping cards as of late. So, I think this is a good card for them. And just a solid ping. Next up is Tainted Water. Reaction plays after the main card is played. Choose one enemy fighter. Deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter. No, I don't think. I mean, domains, doesn't seem to be that many domain cards. Unless all the factions include them, but no. It's too situational. The Penumbral Lock. Objective tokens cannot be flipped. This effect persists until the end of the round, or until one or more objective tokens are moved into an adjacent hex. Okay, so you can flip to an objective but not back. And just for the round as well, so probably wouldn't include it. Vicious Struggle. Choose one enemy fighter and one friendly fighter with no charge tokens that is adjacent to that fighter. Give each chosen fighter one move token. If you play defensively, I think that's quite good to lock down. So sorry, maybe you're using Sorbek's Git's move with Driskit and his 2 squigs until a strong opponent and just lock him down. So I mean that's can be good control, I think, in the right circumstance. Alright, so Gambit spells. Abasoth's Eruption, that's pretty hard to say. Gambit spell for 1 focus. If cast, deal 1 damage to each fighter on a feature token that is not in enemy territory. So that's even your fighters. I'm not a huge fan of this, I guess. Okay, Yara's Summon. Gambit spell 1 channel. So, very accurate. If cast, choose 1 fighter within 3 hexes of the caster. Push the chosen fighter 1 hex towards the caster. Yeah, so it's a distraction, but limited, and you have to succeed. I think there are better push cards, but if you're banking on having spells to do so, might be a decent inclusion. There aren't that many good spells in the game right now. Murky Oblivion, and I mean it's pretty accurate as well. Murky Oblivion, Gambit spell 1 focus, a little less accurate. If cast, each attack action has -1 dice if the target is in a cover hex to a minimum of 1. So if you're playing defensively, I think this is quite strong. Something like Eyes of the Nine, I guess. Quintox Bubble. It's a Gambit spell requiring 1 channel, so very accurate. If cast, choose 1 friendly fighter within 4 hexes of the caster. So that includes the caster. -1 damage to attack action that target the chosen fighter to minimum 1. And the chosen fighter has the flying trait. That's quite nifty actually. So it's -1 damage to every attack action, not just adjacent, which we see a lot of. Yeah, I think this, I mean if you really want to protect someone like Warhammer, I think this is quite good. And he's flying as well, but yeah, that's just icing on the cake. It's not that great. Alright, so upgrades. Blazing Icon. You cannot give this card to Beast. This fighter is a Priest. Okay, so we have some rhyme going on here. When this fighter is the target of an attack action, enemy fighters cannot provide support. Okay, that's quite good. If you get extra effects of being a Priest as well somehow, might be worth the inclusion, but it probably won't make the cut, I reckon. Sure, the support hurts, but I mean, if you have enough dice, you don't really need support. Okay, next up is an illusion. This fighter's range 1 attack actions have Grievous. So it's just like Fights Ferocity basically. So they stack obviously, because Fights Ferocity is different. So I mean, I would love this on Tooth Dagger, because he's rolling +1 damage on a crit. Or even like someone like Cursa with +1 damage on a crit. So basically +3 damage on a crit if you have Fights from Ferocity as well. So like the Mad Mob or the Daughters of Cain here, really love this card. Improbable Maze. That's a fine name. And +2 dice to this attack action with this fighter's minion. But otherwise it's just 1 hammer, 2 damage. So I think just take the Silent Sword instead, and you don't need to rely on minions. And the knockback is not worth anything extra. Living Missile. When this fighter makes a range 1 attack action as part of a charge action, that attack action has +1 damage, Grievous and knockback, so a lot of effects, and that might sound like something great, but it's only for beasts, I guess. I mean, if Riptooth were a beast, I guess this card would be great. I mean, I guess it's pretty good for black powders, because they actually have 2 beasts with pretty decent attacks. They both have 3 swords with Grievous, I think. But they, at the same time, they already have Grievous. So it's just +1 damage and only on a charge. I don't think it's worth it. Prenumbral Pendulum. This fighter has line of sight to each fighter in a cover hex and or edge hex. This doesn't change this fighter's distance from those fighters or the range of this fighter's attack actions. No, I just fail to see why that should be very good. Shadow Coil is a bound spell. You cannot give this card to a Khorne fighter. I guess they hate magic. It's just 1 focus, and while it costs you, you're just a level 1 wizard. And if you succeed, you deal 1 damage to the fight. I think it's just too inaccurate to be worth an upgrade slot. Vortex Staff is restricted to wizards, and it reverses their casting symbol basically. So it's good on any warband with a main focus on their leader wizard rolling focuses. So Vortex is rolling channels instead, or who else? I guess Ilthari's Guardian as well. Abyssal Summoner. During attack actions made by this fighter, if this fighter is on cover hex, this fighter is considered to have 1 additional supporting fighter. That's pretty good for any ranged warband, I guess. Staying in cover, having eligible fighters if you're ranged, that's pretty good. Cursed Cutlass. This fights a brawler, and it gets this attack action. 1 range, 4 swords, 2 damage. That's pretty accurate. And especially with support, it's crazy good. The bounty gain when an enemy fighter is taken out of action by this attack action is Spent Glory, unless this fighter is on a feature token. So, I mean, a lot of the time he will be on feature tokens. And getting spent instead of unspent isn't that big of a deal. So I think it's pretty good, actually. Dark Fortitude. You can't give this fighter to a large fighter. I'm just gonna check what large fighter means. Okay, so the effect is after an activation in which this fighter took 1 or more actions. If this fighter is in a cover hex, heal 2, then break this card. So I mean healing 2 is strong, but breaking an upgrade to heal... I'm dubious. Dark Intellect. Reaction: use this of an activation step in which you drew 1 or more power cards. If this fights in a cover hex, roll 1 magic dice on a roll of channel, draw 1 power card. So you have to use your activation to draw a power card, and then you can potentially draw another power card. That's a really boring card design. Why do they do this? I'm not sure. It can potentially be pretty strong, but I don't like these types of card draw shenanigans. Okay, next up is Dark Majesty. -1 damage from range 1 attack actions that target this fighter to a minimum of 1 if this fights in a cover hex. So only works on range 1. And only if you are in a cover hex. So I think there are just better defensive cards on this, unless you want to stack them for some reason. Dark Strength, +1 damage to this fighter's range 1 attack actions if this fight's in a cover hex. I mean that might make the cut if you're going heavy on that plus damage cards. Might make the final cut, I guess. It's pretty situational, only for range 1, but still not too crappy. Detailed Map Fragment. Gain 1 spent glory as an action. Pick 1 opponent. That opponent can play an upgrade without spending any glory points. Then break this card. So you have to first spend glory to put this upgrade on, then you can use an action to gain a spent glory, and then an opponent gets a free upgrade. That doesn't seem very strong. I mean, it only works 1 time. And reaction after an activation step: if this fighter has 4 map upgrades and is holding an objective, gain 2 glory points and break each map upgrade this fighter has. That's a lot of work to get that out. I don't like this. Faceless Mask. If 1 or more domain gambits have been played in this round, this fighter cannot be chosen after a gambit card has been played and cannot be dealt damage by gambits until the end of this round. Banking on domain gambits. Just to not be able to be chosen or be damaged by gambits. I don't think that's worth it. Next up is Ferocious Bite. +1 dice to this fighter's range 1 and +2 dice to this fighter's range 1 if this fighter's a beast. So that's just crazy strong. I mean, just the +1 dice to this fighter's range 1 is another great card for something like Tooth Dagger or any range 1 aggro warband. I mean, it's just icing on the cake for the beast thing. That will mean 5 swords, 2 damage with cleave for do in claw in round 2. Hey. Owned Instinct, innate single supports to this fighter's range 1 attack actions if this fighter's a companion. +1 damage to this fighter's range 1 attack actions. Innate single supports. I mean, that's not that good, I guess. If you have 2 companions, I guess it's pretty decent, actually. Nether Defense. +1 defense if this fighter is in a cover hex. This fighter cannot be on guard. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. The guard part doesn't really hurt that much, especially if you're already on shields. And +1 defense is, I mean, with Gloom, I think that's worth it as a defensive card. Oblivion's shield is -1 wounds to minimum 1 innate single supports while this fighter is in a cover hex. No, innate dodge while this fighter is in a cover hex, and then you can't be on guard. So you have innate dodge, but you can't be on guard, so that kind of evens out, and then you get -1 wounds. I don't think this is worth it. Then we have another bound spell, Revealing Fog. You cannot give this card to a corn fighter. Poor corn fighters. They really don't like magic. Spell action 1 focus, so fairly inaccurate. If cast, pick 1 feature token that's not an objective token and within 3 hexes of the caster. Place that feature token in the same hex as the caster. And you can only be level 1 wizard when you cast it, so even if you give this to a level 2 wizard, it's still just a level 1 when you cast this spell. I don't think that's good enough to make the upgrade allotment. Shadow Spear is 2 range, 3 hammers, 2 damage. With cleaves are very strong statistic there for the attack action. But you can't make it unless you're in a coverings. A bit dubious. Yeah, it's range 2, 3 hammers with 2 damage with cleave. I mean, it's a very strong profile, and being in cover isn't that hard. Might just make the cut for a weapon caddy warband such as Grimwatch. I mean, bit of on the fence. I think when you pull it off, it's very strong though. Shrewd Wits. This fight's an assassin. Reaction after a scatter ability is resolved. Push this fighter up to 2 hexes. So just pushing even more with Snark. I mean, the final push can't deal damage, but still positioning yourself even better. I think that's quite good for him. Will it make the cut? I'm not sure. Potentially a fun card to try out with the Gits at least. There's lots of fun cards to try out with the Sarbeck's Gits here. Writhing Void Fiends is a Denizen card. Attack actions made by this fighter that targets a fighter in a cover hex has Grievous and Ensnare. I think that's pretty good. You will target fighters in cover hexes a lot of time, because they will just want to stand on cover for the sake of the extra defense, and if they want to kind of negate the effect of this card, they have to give up on the cover, so that's a win-win. So that's pretty strong accuracy for any aggro team, basically. I'm not sure it will make the cut, but that's definitely not a crappy card. So let's move over to the Grand Alliance cards. Starting off with Questionable Loyalty. Sorry. Yeah, we do. It's an end phase hybrid. 1 or more friendly companions are each 3 or more hexes away from each other fighter named on the fighter cards. Or there is 1 or more surviving friendly Slanesh fighter, and the friendly Slanesh leader is out of action. So Slanesh is basically only Dread Pageant. Okay, so if you're really offensive with Vasilak, it's certainly pretty easy to set up. The first part, companion being 3 or more hexes away from the fighter named on the fighter cards. I guess it doesn't work if the other guy is dead, so I'm not sure about this card. It seems a bit weird. Arcane Schemes. Hybrid scores in an end phase if there are 3 or more Gambit spells in your power discard pile. Or 1 or more friendly Siege Wizards each hold an objective. So I mean, the second part is really easy for Vortemis. The first part is really hard, especially in range, first or second round. Dark Domain scores an end phase if there are no objective tokens in your territory. Easy enough. After you score this card, pick 1 opponent. That opponent's warband deals 1 damage to 1 fighter from your warband that's in a cover hex. Might be worth it, I guess. But if your opponent wants to hold a warbands inside your half, they will just place it very, very close to the no man's land and get on it. So, I mean, might be too hard for 1 glory. Gifts of the Gods scores an end phase if there are 3 or more friendly fighters each on 1 upgrade. Yeah, let's read that one more time. 3 or more friendly fighters each have 1 more upgrades. Or your warband holds 2 or more objectives. Holding 2 objectives should be really easy for any large warband. And the first part is not all that hard either. So I think it's a solid card for any hold warband. Goes well together with hold more objectives than the opponent card, which I forgot the name of. from Diechasm. Forbidden Ground duel scores in an end phase if your warband hold each objective in your territory and in no one's territory, and your warband holds 3 or more objectives. This is a horrible card. It's Supremacy, but with added difficulty for the same amount of glory. Master of Death scores in an end phase if 2 or more enemy fights are out of action and no friendly fights are out of action. So it's just a harder, bold deed, and I don't think it's worth it. Banking on not having any dead friendly fighters and 2 enemy fights being dead is pretty hard. So that's for Death. And then we have 3 objectives here for Destruction. No nice things. Scores in an end phase if there are 1 or more upgrade cards in war. 1 or more opponents' discard piles. I mean, if you're playing to kill off upgrades like Buccaneers, this should be scoreable. And especially if Illusion becomes a very regular thing, it should be also very scoreable. So I think for Buccaneers it's pretty doable. Into the Fray scores in an enemy phase if your leader holds an objective in enemy territory and your leader is within 2 hexes of 1 or more enemy fighters. Yeah, that's very good for Moloch, I guess. Keeping it simple, score this in an end phase if 1 or more enemy leaders are out of action, or 1 or more enemy wizards are out of action. Not a fan of this. Will be hard to score for 1 glory, I think. Order Defense scores in an end phase if there are 2 or more surviving friendly fighters, and each surviving friendly fighter has 1 or more guard token for 2 glory. It's not impossible having 2. I mean, each surviving friendly fight needs that guard token. So I mean, there are some cards to help you if you want to play like Majoris. You can kind of bundle them up in one big pile and give them each guard. So it's pretty doable for them, I guess. I'm not sure it's worth the inclusion, but might try to tinker with it. If you want to try it, probably do it with Majoris, I guess. Unsanctioned is the last here for Order. Hybrid scored as an end phase if each surviving enemy fighter is in enemy territory, or 1 or more enemy wizards are out of action. Each surviving enemy fighter being in enemy territory, that's also going to be very hard to and very matchup dependent. Let's move over to searches. We have 1 for Death here, Dead Simple, which is scored if you or your opponent don't have any upgrades when you kill them. So you have to take the target out of action if the attacker and the target had no upgrades. I think that's too situational. And banks on you killing minions, basically. Next up is You Can't Hide. Scored this immediately after friendly fighter's attack action that took the target out of action if the target was in a cover hex or an edge hex. So that's probably going to happen during the course of the game, and this is for Destruction. It will probably not make the search cut, but it's not a horrible card as far as taking out of action searches go. Loyal Service. And scores immediately after an enemy fight's failed attack action if their target had 1 or more supporting fighters, or a friendly companion's attack action that takes the target out of action. So when you give surprise support via Brave Companion or Counter Charge, you really stack the odds in your favor, and this will be fairly easy to score and probably will be scored in such a circumstance during the course of the game. So take a couple of surprise support cards, and this will probably be scoreable actually. Kind of like to try this out. I'm not sure it will make the cut, but it's definitely, I think it definitely has potential. And if you have a companion as well, you can score it the second way when killing someone with a companion. So we had a couple of accuracy and damage cards for companion, so this might be worth taking for such warbands, I guess. Yeah, it has to be order, obviously, so it doesn't work for black powders. And do we have a third end phase? Yeah, we have 1 for Death here. Can't take it with you. Very deathy wording. In the end, nothing will remain but cold corpses and broken promises. Scores in the third end phase if there are 4 or more objective cards in your objective discard pile. Why would you take this? You have to discard 4 objective cards to score a third end phase card for 2 glory. That's quite bad. That's quite horrible, actually. Blessed Fate for Order. Scores in the third end phase if your leader is in enemy territory and has no wound counters, or one or more friendly priests is in enemy territory. So we had like this one priest upgrade, and there are a couple of priests. I know that Morgwaith is a priest, so if you potentially have 2 priests with that upgrade, it's definitely scoreable. But I think just 2 glory for such a situational card in the third end phase is not worth it. So let's move over to the Ploys and start off with 3 cards for Chaos. Cursed Shadows. Flip each feature token that is not an objective token. Deal 1 damage to each feature on an even number objective token revealed in this way. Then flip each objective token revealed in this way. I mean, can be decent ping, I guess, but it's only for even numbered objectives. Okay, so if you're in the reveal token step at the start of the setup, know that you have the opposite objectives, I guess. Terrifying Endurance. Choose 1 friendly fighter with 1 or more stagger tokens. Remove those tokens, then if the chosen fighter is a Nurgle fighter, stagger 1 enemy fighter within 2 hits of the chosen fighter. So this card, to be usable, needs your fighter to become staggered. I guess it will be good against the Skavens, but that's very situational. No. Vile Offerings. Vile Offering. That's 1 offering, not several. Deal 1 damage to a friendly fighter, then draw 1 power card or 2 cards if that damage took the fighter out of action. I mean, the second part is just a lure to kill off one of your fighters. But yeah, dealing 1 damage to draw a power card might be usable for just ping Arnold to draw a power card, I guess. Could be usable. I'm not sure it will make the cut though. Death's Dues. Start off with some power cards here for Death. We have 4 cards actually. Death's Dues. Pick 1 player for each illusion upgrade their surviving fighters have. That player picks 1 spending 1 glory point or break that card. So it's only really good if you know that your opponent plays illusions. Otherwise it's just too situational. Buried Treasure is next up. When you play this card, spend 2 glory points. If you do, pick 1 upgrade in your power card pile and give that upgrade to friendly fighters. You have to pay 2 glory to play an discarded upgrade. I mean, if you have a lot of glory to spend, that might be useful, I guess. It's not terrible. If you're playing with lots of illusions that gets discarded, might be worth it. But yeah, probably won't make the cut. Next up is Death's Soldiers. Play this only in your power step. You can use the following reaction. This effect persists until the end of the round or until you use this reaction. Use this during an attack action that targets a friendly fighter. After the attack roll, the attack has -1 damage to a minimum of 1 until that it has been resolved. Pretty interesting. In the right circumstance, it can surely be very powerful, and it's very telegraphed, obviously. Lethal Advance is for leaders only, also for Death. Push up to 2 friendly fighters within 2 hexes of your leader, 1 hex towards the nearest enemy fighter. For Death, I guess like pushing 2 strong Mortex closer, or potentially like Kenta closer to Kanan. I guess it's pretty decent for something like them. Need some reliable alive leader. Skittering Price is for destruction. Pick 1 objective token in an empty hex. Most of the time objective tokens won't be empty because you have to go on them to flip them. Scatter 2 from that hex and place the objective token in the end hex. If the end hex is blocked or contains a feature token, or if the chain is interrupted, leave the objective token where it is. If the end hex is lethal, remove the objective token from the battlefield instead. Seems a bit weird and potentially pretty weak, I guess. Methodical Destruction. Pick one objective token held by a friendly fighter with no move or charge token. Remove that token from the battlefield. So yeah, we see Snark's Sauertang here, and obviously it works for him because he doesn't move. But is that something you want to do with Sorbacks when you can potentially hold a lot of feature tokens? Not sure. I mean, Rothgon can score via destroying upgrades. I'm not sure. I probably wouldn't include it. Opportunistic Mob is also for destruction. Reaction plays after friendly fighter's attack action that takes the target out of action. If that friendly fighter had one or more supporting fighters, draw 2 power cards. So if you're playing a destruction warband with a lot of fighters, I think something like the Cunning Crew can really make good use of this to draw 2 power cards when killing someone with assist. It's quite strong for them actually. Shadow Yaws, Gambit spell, 1 channel, so very strong, accuracy wise. If cast, choose 1 enemy fighter within 4 hexes of the caster and in a cover hex. Deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter. So very easy to cast. And ping damage there, another good ping damage for Wormspat, I guess. Light of Truth. Choose 1, and this is order. Choose 1 fighter, heal 1 the chosen fighter, or 2 if the chosen fighter has illusion upgrades when you play the card, but it's choosing, so you only also kill the fighter's illusion, so I don't think it's worth it. There are probably better heal cards. Just take healing potion. Discipline, defense, reaction. Play this after a failed attack action that targeted a friendly fighter. Pick 1, give that friendly fighter 1 guard token or remove 1 move token from that fighter. That has to be a failed attack to remove the move. Removing or giving the guard token, I don't think that's very good, but the move token can be strong. But I'm not a fan of this. I think Order really gets some crappy Grand Alliance cards. I think they really need to get better stuff. It's a lot of with guards and vulnerable fighters and all that, yes. Next up is Martial Discipline for Order. In the next activation step you can re-roll results of single supports and full supports in friendly fights attack and defense rolls. That's pretty nice, I guess. That's 2 symbols you can re-roll, so that's like a 5/6 on a die. Yeah, might be worth it for like a ranged warband or something. But probably won't make the cut. Shaft of Light, that sounds really dirty. Shaft of Light. Pick 1 feature token that's not an objective token and is within 3 hexes of 1 or more friendly fighters. Flip that token. You can't flip an objective, but still. Within 3. So that's actually also can actually be on a token the fighter is on. Okay. Let's move over to the spells, if we have any. We have 1 for Chaos here. A Spiteful Channeling is a Gambit spell. Reaction. 1 channel. So very accurate. Play this after damage is dealt to a friendly wizard before the out of action check. So it doesn't need to taken out of action. Just needs to happen before the out of action check. that wizard must be the caster. If cast, deal 1 damage to the enemy fighter nearest to the caster. But I mean, you're banking on someone attacking your leader or your wizard. Most of the time that will be your leader. I think there will be probably better spells to include. That's not as situational. Let's move over to the upgrades. First up for Chaos here, Killing Frenzy. This fighter's range 1 and 2 have Grievous. If this fighter and or the target have 1 or more wound tokens. So we had just a range 1 has Grievous card before. That were not like more this situational. But this is for range 2 as well, so I mean, yeah. I don't think it's that good. Demonic Agility, also for Chaos. You cannot give this to a leader. If this fighter is a Slaanesh fighter, this fighter is an assassin. Whatever. When this fighter is dealt damage by an attack action, reduce the damage by 1 to minimum of 1 for each dodge in this fighter's defense roll. But dodge is just 1 symbol on the die. So very situational damage reduction. Even just rolling 1 dodge is pretty hard. I don't think that's very good. Unless you're rolling like 4 or 5 dice or something, and it's still not very good. And Chaos here as well. Reckless Pact. Reaction during this fight's attack action. After the defense roll, deal 0, 1 or 2 damage to this fighter. Then re-roll X dice in the attack roll, where X is the amount of damage you dealt to this fighter. Reroll 1 additional dice if this fighter is a siege fighter. So if it's a siege fighter, you just get a free reroll without dealing damage. I think the dealing damage kind of hurts. But I mean, if this is the last attack that happens in the game, then dealing 2 damage to the fighter will maybe save them. So I mean, in the right circumstance, obviously quite good. But most of the time probably not gonna make the cut. Shadow Maul, 1 range, 2 hammers, 2 damage, knockback and stagger. I think both knockback and stagger are pretty weak effects. Stagger happens after the attack roll, and knockback isn't that great. You have to succeed to get knockback. Plus 1 dice while 1 or more of this fighter or the target of this attack action are in a cover X. So if you are in cover X or the target is in a cover X, you get plus 1 dice. That's pretty nice, but it's still just the same as Silent Sword, with more situational ability, but more situational. Next up for Death Falls Vigor, give this only to a fighter with a wound characteristic of 3 or less. So illusion to a 3 or less fighter wounded dude. Plus 1 dice to this fight's range 1 attack actions, plus 1 move. And this is for death. So I mean, that's very strong for someone like the Champion, the Harvester, Prince of Dust, or any of the hard-hitting dudes from Grimwatch. So that's, I mean, yet another great card for death. Next up, also for death, Bonds of Death. Give this only to a fighter with wound characteristic of 2. After an attack action that takes this fighter out of action, place this fighter in a starting hex in your territory, give this fighter 1 race token, then break this card. So the bad thing is that you have to be killed via an attack action to make this reaction. If you're killed by a lethal X or ploy, this doesn't happen, and it's only playable on wounds 2. Don't think it's that great, and most of these warbands can race either way. So. Cruel Maul, 1 range, 2 swords, 2 damage, plus 2 dice if the target has 1 or more wound counters. So it's potentially 4 swords if the target has wound counters. Now we're starting to see something that actually can compete with Silent Sword, but I think still it's not as good. and more situational. But I mean, in some of these warbands you obviously will take more than one weapon, so maybe. But I mean, I think just still Soultooth Dagger is way better. Transferred Vigor is a spell action for a wizard, not a bound spell then. 1 channel, so pretty easy to cast. If cast, choose one friendly fighter that is out of action. Place the chosen fighter in a hex adjacent to the caster and give that fighter 1 race token. Then deal damage to the caster equal to the wounds characteristic of the chosen fighter. Oof. I mean, it's a strong race, but at the same time dealing at least 2 damage to the caster. That kind of hurts. I don't like it. Heave Ho for destruction. Knockback for range 1 and 2. And you can do reaction as well. During this fight's attack action after the drive back step, if the target was driven back 2 or more hexes, deal 1 damage to the target. So what you have to know is that knockback only works if you actually succeed with the attack. It's not a regular drive back. And yeah, I don't think it's good enough. Counter Punch, reaction after an enemy fight's attack action. If the attacker is adjacent, stagger the attacker. No. Instinctive Shield. When this fighter is given this upgrade, place 1 shield counter on this card, plus 1 shield counter if this fighter is a wizard. After this fighter is dealt damage before checking if this fighter is taken out of action, remove the shield counters from this card. If you do, heal X this fighter, where X is the number of shield counters you removed. And the damage reduction, I think it's pretty decent. This is Rabble Wrecker. It's an attack action, 1 range 2 hammers 2 damage with scything, but only for leaders. Only for leaders. That kind of hurts. Leaders probably have better attacks than that. Not gonna include that one. Next up is an illusion that you can only give to a vulnerable fighter. Yet again, Order gets this crap with vulnerable fighters. What's up with this one? So you get inspiration for a vulnerable fighter. Once you're vulnerable, you're probably already inspired. I'm not sure how they are designing these cards to Order. They are really giving them some crappy cards. Banishing Light. Reaction after this fighter's activation, you can flip 1 or more feature tokens that are not objective tokens and that are within 1 hex of this fighter. Yeah, that includes the hex he's on. So you can potentially score hold searches because the reactions happen before scoring. So you can move on and flip before the activation ends. Have to think about what cards you could score out of that, but maybe something like maybe pretty good for Starblood Stalkers, I guess, if they want to speed up their inspiration mechanic. Brigade Strength. When this fighter makes an attack roll with 3 or more dice, this fighter is considered to have 1 additional supporting fighter. Plus 1 dice to this fighter's range 1 attack action if this fighter is a brawler. So yeah, pretty good for Megrim as we see in the art here, since it's for Order. It works for... So the first part works for any range, but the second part is only for range 1. I mean, it's a decent accuracy card. I'm not sure it will make the cut, but it's not as terrible as most cards for Order. Discipline Formation. When a friendly fighter is the target of an attack action and this fighter is adjacent to the target, or when this fighter is the target of an attack action and has 1 more supporting fighters, you can re-roll any number of dice in the defense roll. Yeah, so if you're rolling more than 1 defense die, it's pretty decent. Otherwise, it's just too weak, and just take Champion's Fortitude. Yes. So yeah, that's everything. That's all of it. So there were some strong cards. I think the 5 hex push with a scatter was really good. I think the Cursed Cutlass is a decent weapon upgrade here. Dark Strength was also pretty good. Plus 1 damage if you're in cover hex for range 1. This Ferocious Bite is just crazy good. It's just augmented limbs with added benefits. Kings of the Deep, King of the Deeps, decent accuracy boost, some strong search cards here, ever downwards I think it's really good. I also think that Sudden Revelation is super strong for end phases. And this is also pretty easy to have one enemy on a feature token with wounds for 2 glory. This should also be doable for a Swarm Warband being 3 cover hexes for 2 glory, and getting 1 damage on one little fighter shouldn't hurt you too much. So yeah, some decent cards here. Yeah, and as usual, I think now we're used to seeing it like for the Grand Alliance card, Death gets all the fun stuff. And Order gets left out, I think, a bit. That's quite clear. Lots of weak cards for Order generally. We will have to see a boost to their Grand Alliance cards if we want to have some equality there. So yeah, without further ado, this has been interesting. It will be fun to play with a new meta here. And yeah, see you around, take care, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment. Maybe I got something completely wrong or missed some factor that makes certain cards way stronger or way weaker, so just feel free to comment. I'm gonna be super open to discussion, so yeah, without further ado, take care, bye.